Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It's been a little while since I've stirred up the passions of my dear friend Luke Jones on all things Turtles, but certainly Tuesday night's effort against the Purdue Boilermakers certainly conjures up a little fear of the Turtle. Luke Jones joins us now. You can, of course, follow him at Baltimore Luke as well as at WNST.net, and Luke at WNST.net finds him. And look, man, pitchers and catchers have reported, and we're all blah, blah about that. There's no Steve Bisciotti press conference, and we will get to that later on, and the Kareem Hunt and all the other stuff that's going on in the NFL. But this has been a nice little period in February where this basketball team that's emerging a little bit plays twice a week, and I give myself 2 hours to watch my boy Bino on the sidelines and Turgeon and all the abuse and losing at halftime. Boy, this is an interesting basketball team. I think it's an interesting league, and I have told you for 6 weeks now, I'm sort of caught up in watching the Terps twice a week and enjoying it immensely right now.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. And, I mean, as far as Tuesday night's game, what a tale of two halves. I mean, the halftime, I remember exchanging a text with you as far as what the game was like, and it's just very underwhelming. They didn't shoot well. They're really having trouble with Purdue's defense. It's not as though Purdue was shooting the lights out, but they were really good in transition. Maryland wasn't getting any second-chance opportunities, and even late in the half, Maryland goes on that 9-1 run, and then Purdue scores the last 5 points of the half, and they're up 8 at halftime, and you're kind of thinking, well, here we go again. You know, the last few years, Maryland hasn't fared particularly well against Purdue, and you see what Carson Edwards does in the first half, and you're thinking they're in trouble. And then they come out in the second half, and they absolutely throttled them. I mean, that's as good of a half as Maryland has played all year. Probably one of the better halves of basketball that they've played in the Mark Turgeon era, quite frankly. And they absolutely smothered them defensively. They made shots. And when you look at how that game profiled and the fact that Purdue was 17% from the field in the second half, and you look at what the freshmen did, that's exciting not just for right now, but from the big picture standpoint. There was a stretch of time where freshmen for Maryland scored 21 straight points. When you look at what Ayala did in the first half, kind of keeping them hanging around, and then he hit the 2 big threes to tie the game, 7-8 minutes into the second half. You look at what Wiggins did. You look at what Jalen Smith did after a tough first half. That was just really exciting to see, and that was as complete of a performance in the second half as we've seen from Maryland. And I think you give them a lot of credit because Purdue had played well. Certainly they've positioned themselves as a top 15 team in the nation and a top team in the Big Ten, but that was a huge win. And I think this is the time of year we've all been kind of waiting. Mark Turgeon's had teams that have gotten off to good starts. He's had young players that have played well, and you kind of get to February and then you wait and see. And more often than not, it seems like this is the time of year they've either wilted or they just haven't gotten any better. And, they went through that stretch where they lost 3 of 4, but since then to come out and win at Nebraska the way they did last week and then to do what they did in the second half on Tuesday night, that's pretty darn exciting.
I always go back to the Suleiman and the Diamond Stone year where they had a lot of talent, right? Trimble,
yeah.
They had a lot of talent,
year, right? Yeah.
The hired gun year, and that would be the year you'd really beat on Turgeon and beat on the team. They were a pretty selfish bunch of ball players, and I think looking at this group and the youth of this group, there's not a lot of selfishness, but boy, Bruno Fernando could be selfish if he wanted to be, I guess. At some point you'd say give him the ball, let him take it through the lane, nobody could stop him, but then he would get in foul trouble. It is a nice blend, and they're finding that in a way that they never found that when they had the best group of basketball players a couple of years ago. This is a nice blend. And look, I'm not going to go start talking crazy Steve Blake and, that era and that team and all of that. But I do see some pieces of Wiggins that remind me of Mouton, and some pick-me-up that on any given night, they got 3 or 4 guys that might be able to make that shot with 4 seconds left to win a game for you.
Yeah, and again, to do it on a kind of a sleepy Tuesday night in where whether it's Penn State or Nebraska or wherever it might be. I mean, that's one thing. To do it in March, that's still a different animal, and that's still to be determined for this team. And certainly you like what the freshmen have been able to do, and that bodes well for the next couple of years, assuming at least most of these guys stick around, which, after what happened with Kevin Huerter and Justin Jackson, I mean, you never really know, I suppose. But I think it has been encouraging in that way, and they do have a lot of versatility in terms of different guys that can knock down shots. We've seen that from Wiggins coming off the bench. Ayala was huge on Tuesday night. Jalen Smith, even though he had the rough first half. But I want to go back to what you said about Bruno Fernando, because I think if anyone who follows NBA mock drafts, it looks like this guy has a chance to be a top 10 pick. I think it's very clear what this is going to be his swan song, barring something really strange. But I think what you saw on Tuesday night, Purdue just completely collapsed on him, double teams in the first half, and Maryland didn't handle that very well. And it's not as though Bruno was trying to force shots. I think he didn't have a field goal attempt, I want to say, in the first 12 or 13 minutes of the game. But Purdue did a really good job in that regard, but Maryland adjusted, and I give Bruno a lot of credit, even though you look at the final line and you say, okay, 12 points, 4 of 4 from the field, he hit a handful of free throws, but I think he just played really smart in that, understanding double teams were coming and they were going to collapse on him in the lane, that he didn't try to force it, that he did have the confidence in some of his younger teammates to hit shots, or someone would cut toward the basket and he'd find them. So I think that was just a really smart performance from him, and I think it does speak to how complimentary Maryland played on Tuesday night. I mean, at halftime, you kind of look at where they were. Their big three didn't really give them a whole lot. I mean, Fernando and Jalen Smith had a combined 5 points at the half, but they got just enough from Ayala, just enough from Cowan, that they were still in it even after kind of the gaffe of the last 35 seconds going into intermission. But then in the second half, it's just, it's like a light bulb went on, and they just played so well across the board. And to see your freshmen play that way against the 12th-ranked team in the country, I mean, it really does get you excited for what happens, which, by the way, they have a really tough stretch coming up now. I mean, 3 of the next 4 on the road. I think, clearly Michigan, after they lost to Penn State, they're not going to be in a very good mood. They're at Iowa. They play Ohio State, and then they go to Penn State, one of those sleepy 6:30 games in State College.
Yeah, we found out about that on Tuesday night, right?
Yeah. So it's not as though you just look at this game and say everything's fine with Maryland. They need to build on this. This was a really good win, very impressive win to be happy about, but the next 4 games, 3 of them on the road, 2 of those against ranked teams, they need to be on alert, and they need to handle their business. And if they can do that, and I'm not saying they're going to go 4-0, but if you can win 1 of Michigan and Iowa on the road and then take care of the other 2, if you can win 3 out of the next 4, boy, you're in really, really good position going into the final week of the regular season, and you're right there as far as where you want to be far as seeding for the Big Ten tournament goes.
Luke Jones and I are praising all things Turtles in the aftermath of a whitewashing of the Purdue Boilermakers at the Xbox on a sleepy, icy Tuesday night in College Park, Maryland. The road will be a little different as we get through the Big Ten here. Luke, was I being a jerk on Twitter by alluding to early 1980s Orioles teams with names like Ayala and Wiggins? I love this stuff because I'm Googling it because I'm an old baseball nerd like you. I'm wondering, were they ever teammates? Benny Ayala wasn't around long, and I know that, he played with the Mets before, maybe like the Indians or somebody after, and I looked, and they were never teammates. Wiggins came after Benny Ayala, so, they have an Ayala, they have a Wiggins, they have a Sticks, but not a T-Bone. But the Morcell thing for me, and I know you and I have talked about Morcell a little bit, I expected more offense out of him. Maybe I didn't understand his game well enough. Maybe everyone that's recruited out of Mount St. Joe to go to Maryland, you're always recruited as an offensive player, right? But 32 minutes, 4 points, you'd look at the box score and say, yeah, what's happened to the local kid? Why is Turgeon giving him so many minutes? If you just looked at the box score and then you watch the game and you're like, oh, he's He's that guy. He's that guy that's going to be completely disruptive and give you 32 full effort minutes and fouls, the whole deal. Morcell's a very underappreciated part of this thing, and that's why I want to talk about him in the aftermath of Purdue on a night when they only scored 56 points,
Yeah, and I think you look at the job that he did on Carson Edwards, especially in the second half. I mean, Edwards had a good first half. There's no question about that. But you look at his final numbers, 8 of 27, 3 of 13 from 3. That's a very inefficient 24 points for Carson Edwards, who's a tremendous player. There's no question about that. I don't want to take anything away from him, but it does speak to the job that Morcell, who, he drew a bulk of that kind of duty to try to lock him down. And there were some others in there as well. But you're right. I mean, Morcell, it's funny. I forget who you compared to Byron Mouton, but, Morcell kind of reminds me of him. Not that they're the same exact player or even though their size is probably pretty similar, but, he's kind of that dirty work kind of guy. He doesn't have an overly polished offensive game. He's only averaging about 8 points per game. He'll give you 14, 15 points every now and then, but he locks down someone defensively, and he is someone that does some of that dirty work for you. And I think there's probably some validity to hoping that he would be a little bit more of a refined offensive player. I think that's fair, but you also look at some of the other players on this team that are able to provide scoring, able to provide shooting. And that's where you look at Morcell and say, he's a Baltimore kid, so, right off the bat, you're going to root for him in that way. We always talk about wanting Maryland to recruit locally, but he definitely brings some value that isn't necessarily going to show up in the box score. I'd certainly agree with that.
Luke Jones joining us here. You can, of course, find him, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter as we sort of wade through the Ravens and try to figure out how many of the Orioles are going to lose this year. The Terps are the one little sort of nugget in the middle of all this, and UMBC had some promise. Towson's been lousy a lot. Coppin's been a little better in the conference, but just from a local basketball standpoint, Luke, it's always a lot more fun when the Terps are relevant, and they're more than relevant. You talk about these tough road games, and I've gotten into watching the Big Ten Network. I know where it is on my dial. I know who the broadcasters are. I've always known who Dave Revson is as well as you do, and I've gotten to know some of the broadcasters, even having them. Having John on the program from time to time. He's calling the game on Tuesday night. You and I have been out to Mackey now. Boy, the Big Ten thing, I'm okay in this league. In the same way when I said the Orioles should have gone to the National League East, it would have helped them win. It wouldn't have helped them draw Yankees or Red Sox fans to the city and to the games. But being in a conference where you can win, you can play well, it's certainly not that case for the football side where they're going to get their heads beaten in until they don't anymore. But the basketball side of this is not a bad league. It's not a bad place to be. These are interesting games. Going into Ann Arbor on Saturday at noon, even though I get stuck here in the Michigan Fight Song, it still makes for good theater. And I think these are good games. It's a good league. And certainly this league, which had been maligned as sort of a subpar basketball conference and whatnot, I don't get that. I think the games are really evenly matched. The league's evenly matched. And I think you'll see that when they go to Michigan and they go to Iowa. And we don't know much about Iowa, but I know they're good.
Yeah, and I think even when the announcement was made that they were going to the Big Ten, I think there was certainly disappointment. Understandable when you consider what Maryland, how long they had been in the ACC and the tradition of that conference. But let's face it, the ACC really isn't what it used to be, at least in terms of just tradition. I mean, you have right now, I'm looking at the ACC standings, and you have Syracuse and Louisville and Virginia Tech and Notre Dame and Boston College. It's not what it was. It used to, you think of it as the 9-team league when Florida State joined, and you had the ACC tournament and you had the play-in game. It's not as intimate, and none of these conferences are that way anymore. When you see some of the realignment that's gone under, that's taken place over the last 10 to 15 years, but I think you do look at the Big Ten for as much as there was a reputation, at least at one point. You still see it. There's more physicality in this conference, but it kind of had the reputation that a lot of 50 to 46 games, which, quite quite frankly. I don't think anyone really enjoys watching that kind of a brand of basketball. But, this is a good league. And I think it really comes down to this. It's going to take a long time for Maryland to cultivate the kind of rivalries that they had in the ACC with Duke and North Carolina and Virginia and NC State. And it may never truly feel that same way again because sports just aren't, college sports aren't what you thought of them as 25 years ago.
And certainly the thoughts of you getting in your car in Shrewsbury on a Tuesday where there's 6 inches of snow and ice all over the road and going to College Park, or getting in the car in White Marsh or Catonsville and going to College Park on a icy night and the game comes into my basement in HD, that's when I start to plead the NFL case, Luke. Hey, why don't I go to the game? The game's better at home. I talked to Mark Messina. I mean, I saw Mark's piece, and I'm going to have him on, now that his brother's getting in the Hall of Fame, and I saw the story that he wrote, and he's like, he liked watching the game better on TV because he could see the strike zone. I mean, that makes all the sense in the world when I watch baseball at home and then go to the ballpark. At home, I watch the game. At the ballpark, I look at the girls and drink beer,
Right. And even, just to go back to the Big Ten for a moment, and the ACC has this now, and you kind of go across the board. When you have these conferences that have upwards of 14, 15, 16 teams in it, you're not playing everyone on a home and away. So that right there, in and of itself, unlike the old ACC schedule with 9 teams and you played 16 games and it was a home and away, you were going to go to Durham, you were going to go to Chapel Hill and Raleigh, and all those teams are going to come play you at Cole Fieldhouse.
You don't get to see J.J. Redick enough to even yell F you at him. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, it is a different era in general in that way. And I'm not saying it's better now. I miss those days as much as anyone else in the ACC and complaining about the teams on Tobacco Road getting the unfair advantage and all of that.
Hey, get off my lawn, huh?
Right. But that said, I mean, you look at the Big Ten right now, Maryland is one of, 6 teams in the top 25, and it's a very competitive league. And I think when you have programs like Michigan State, even though Indiana is way down over the last couple years, they have pedigree. Michigan, Purdue, Wisconsin, there's some tradition there. And I think over time, and this is going to be the big key, Maryland has to win. They need to make NCAA tournaments. They need to do something in NCAA tournaments. And I'm not saying they have to win a national championship per se, but you'd like to see Maryland get back into that territory where it's kind of an assumption that they're going to make the NCAA tournament. And you'd like to think most years, more often than not, they're a team that is very viable to be in the Sweet 16. And, maybe that one team that comes along that can get you back to a Final Four for the first time in 17 years, going on 17 years now. Not saying this year's team will be that, but I'd like to see Maryland get back into that territory. There's no reason they shouldn't be with the facilities, with the area from which they can recruit. And they are in a good conference. So they need to get there, and they haven't been there. And that's been one of my criticisms of Mark Turgeon, and certainly not saying that he walked into a situation like Maryland was, say, 2003, but there's no reason that this program shouldn't be in the NCAA tournament virtually every year. I mean, that's just reality. And if you don't like that, then your standards have gotten too low. I mean, that's where they should be. And then,
well, that's what they signed up for. That's what all this money's about, and Kevin Plank running around, and why they're trying so hard that kids drop dead on their campus and nobody figures it out. I mean, this is all of that soccer and lacrosse and the things that they're really good at down there. They moved into the Big Ten to make money, but basketball was going to be the big money maker for them, even though football is the big money maker in the conference. Basketball was like, they're supposed to sell out on Tuesday night when they're ranked against Purdue. And, Purdue's interesting to me because as much as Virginia, Duke, Carolina, all the hated teams and the rivalries, and at any point, Clemson was the best team in football in the division, or Miami then came along and beat everybody up, and Florida State came in later and beat everybody up in football. But on the basketball side of things, Purdue should be one of those teams, along with Michigan State, and maybe just your traditional, we don't like Penn State, we don't like Ohio State, they beat us at football or whatever, and we want to get even. But from a basketball standpoint, having gone to Mackey, having seen Purdue be among the more competitive teams of the era now that Maryland's in, there should, if you don't have a little disdain for Purdue, you're never going to. I'm with you. I don't think you see these teams often enough or know them often enough. But, Purdue, Michigan State, those are the two I circle every year and say, they're going to be good teams. You never know with Nebraska and Iowa and Ohio State and Michigan. They're sort of some years, like Maryland. Some years they're okay, some years they're not. Purdue and Michigan State, to me, are the class of the conference.
Yeah, I think I would put Michigan in there with the recent success that they've had over the last few years.
Do I have to? All right.
They're a top 10 team.
You have to listen to their fight song at 11:30 in the morning on Saturday.
Right. And
always turns my Wheaties.
As far as the big picture standpoint, I'd throw Indiana in there. They're bad this year, but from a pedigree standpoint, you go back to 2002. Certainly, there's some history there between those two programs. But I think part of the issue, one, Maryland has to win more consistently, and that's going to be something that needs to happen over time, and that's going to continue to be a challenge for Mark Turgeon. And that's why I said, as huge as Tuesday's win was, they need to follow that now by faring well over these next 4 games, 3 out of the next 4. They need to take a couple of those. If they can win 2 out of those 3 road games, I think you feel really, really good about this team. But you look at Tuesday night, I think attendance was just a hair under 15,000. It's about, the building was about 85% full, at least in terms of announced attendance. Now, part of the issue is, and this is one thing where I will take the Big Ten Network to task, these 6:30 starts. 6:30, trying to go anywhere in the Washington, D.C. area, that area of the
I thought it was wonderful from my couch. I'm like, man, this thing's going to be over at 8:25.
But trying to get there, good luck with that.
Yeah.
I'm just being realistic there. And look, you can ask people to take a half day from work and stuff like that, but that's just not reality. So these 6:30 starts don't help in that regard. But a lot of this just comes down to it. Just Maryland. It's been quite a while now since they have been a consistently really good year-to-year kind of program. They've had their moments. They've made a couple tournaments with Turgeon. They made it to the Sweet 16 with the hired gun team that still kind of felt like a letdown when you consider where they were ranked at one point during that season. But just having that consistency. I kind of go back to where Maryland was under Gary Williams in those 8 to 9 years leading up to the national championship. They made the tournament every single year. They made the Sweet 16 several times in that stretch, and it was just an expectation that Maryland was going to go to the NCAA tournament.
Oh, my God. In my old calendars, if you look back into the 90s, you would always circle that, that Thursday and Friday, knowing the Terps were going to be playing in Austin, Texas, or Boise, Idaho, or Broken Pelvis, Texas, or, wherever it was going to be, right?
Right. So, and that's not, Maryland wasn't a top 5 program every single year. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying they have to be in the Final Four every year or they're a failure. It's just, can you get that bar back to where it was in the 90s and the early portion of, 90s post-sanctions and, Gary Williams' arrival, and then in the early 2000s where you knew Maryland was going to make the NCAA tournament, and you knew that they had a really good chance in any given year to at least get to the Sweet 16. And then, of course, we saw what happened in 01 and 02, and that was magical. And I don't know if Maryland will ever win another national championship, but can they at least get back to a point where every year you're penciling them in for the NCAA tournament, no questions asked, and all right, maybe they might have a first-round exit or something of that nature from time to time, but they're at least getting there, and we're not talking about missing out on the NIT or some of these other lesser tournaments or anything like that. So that's where I want to see Maryland take the next step. Obviously, that's something that has to be proven over multiple years, and I'm not saying that that's easy and just a given, but if you truly want to get enthusiasm back for this program that's sustainable in the Big Ten, knowing that you're not having Duke or North Carolina or teams like that coming to College Park on a Wednesday night in February, well, then you need to win a little more consistently, and that's the challenge. And I like where this team is right now. I really do. I like the freshmen on this team, but there's still work to be done between now and Selection Sunday, which at this point I think bracketology had Maryland, Joe Lunardi had Maryland as a 6th seed going into Tuesday's action. So, they've kind of, I've seen them as high as maybe a 4 seed. That was before they went through their little hiccups that they had a couple weeks back. But I think they're comfortably in the field, but they need to stay that way. And these next 4 games, 3 of them on the road, are going to be pretty big.
He is Luke Jones. He is all things Baltimore sports out at Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. And, of course, keeping everything handy around here and waiting for anything. Anything you want to say on the Ravens just to drop in here? There is no Bisciotti press conference. The Kareem Hunt thing happened, but the Ravens side, for at least now, do you expect any of the tectonic plates to shift here in the next week or 10 days? Because I really don't. I mean, we're 2 weeks out on the combine right now. It doesn't feel like there's any hot market on Joe Flacco or getting C.J. Mosley done, or tomorrow morning there's going to be. I don't feel like anything's really weirdly imminent, and it's probably why they're as quiet as they are right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how they proceeded in recent years, most of their cap-related cuts have taken place either at the start of free agency or maybe a week before. Maybe they would have a more modest re-signing, a Brent Urban kind of a re-signing prior to free agency, but at this point, they're a month out from from players hitting the open market. It's difficult envisioning them getting something done with C.J. Mosley before that point, because it's just, I think any player at this point, you're doing yourself a disservice. If you're this close to free agency, why wouldn't you at least dip your toes into the market, even if you have every intention of staying? And look, C.J. wants to stay. I understand that, but C.J. deserves to get paid, and he's got a chance to perhaps make some really lucrative money.
Well, there's only one way to get the market rate is go to the market, right?
So I think when you're getting this close to free agency, it's difficult in that regard. I'm with you that I'd be surprised to see any cuts this early, just based on how they've operated. To your point, you don't get a sense that there's a major market for Joe Flacco right now in terms of any kind of a deal being imminent. Maybe they can figure one out. I'm still skeptical in that regard. But it does feel quiet, and I suppose, even though that doesn't necessarily equate to winning in playoffs and Super Bowl and anything like that, but when you compare it to the Cleveland Browns taking the PR hit that they're taking right now with the Kareem Hunt signing, and who knows if he's even going to be on the field for them.
It's amazing because the Ravens take the same PR hit because every time Kareem Hunt happens in the league, Ray Rice's face pops up on the 6 o'clock news. It's incredible.
And that's they have to deal with that. I mean,
Bruce Springsteen wrote a song called "The Price You Pay." Right?
That's an ugly part of their history. Yeah. There's no question about that, and the mismanagement of that leading up to the video being released, and then, but you have that, and then in Pittsburgh, you have Antonio Brown putting out a video bidding farewell to Steelers fans, which I laugh at seeing that kind of stuff because, one, you're not really helping your chances of being traded when you put something like that out there. Well, we already
sort of think he's a moron, right? I mean, he posted live Facebook footage while his coach was saying, don't let anything out of the locker room. So
look, he has a ton of baggage. There's no question about that. He has some off-field issues, but he's also a tremendous wide receiver. And I still look at that Pittsburgh cap hit that they're going to endure when you're talking about $20+ million in dead money on 1 year, and maybe they ultimately trade him in June, and then at that point they're able to make it they can endure that cap hit this year and next year. But I'm still not nearly as convinced as other people that he's played his final game for the Steelers for that reason. And I'll also throw out there, and I just Googled this. I don't know if we forget because it happened 12 years ago. 12 years ago, or actually I guess 13 years ago at this point, Ray Lewis wanted to be traded from the Ravens, and a lot of people forget that. Before they drafted Haloti Ngata, you can Google it, and you can find articles and columns from 2006, and there wasn't social media then, though. That's the difference. I mean, there wasn't anyone that was going on Twitter or Instagram and running their mouth. They basically made a request through their agent, and it was through back channels. So I think so much of this ends up being blown up with social media, and that's not to excuse Brown. I want to be very clear about that, but I'm still not ready to say that he won't be with the Steelers in 2019 because of what that cap hit is going to do. I mean, you're talking about
we'll have to find somebody else that wants to give him $20 million, too. Not every team in the league is going to take him on, right?
Well, it's not. See, the cap hit wouldn't be that dramatic because for another team, because I'm talking about the dead money from bonuses that would, the acceleration on the prorated portions of his bonuses over the course of his deal. It would just be an extraordinary dead money hit, and you don't have the player anymore. So it's February. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and then. And look, maybe they will trade him. Maybe there'll be a trade, announced. Well, won't be announced until next month at the earliest. But I still think that's far from over as far as how that's going to play out. But to get back to my point about the Ravens, I'd rather be in the position that they're in now than trying to deal with the drama that those two organizations are dealing with. And that's not to say the Ravens will be better or that they're winning the division because of that, but you'd rather have a quieter offseason than what either of those teams are enduring right now, that's for sure.
He's Luke Jones. Baltimore Luke is the way to find him. We will be around all week, and I dare I say we will not be tweeting about Alliance football, but I did chat with Howard Balzer about that. But we're into the Terps, waiting on the Orioles, and doing what we do around here in breaking news. You can find us out in the Buy at Toyota.com, audio of all 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Of course, the morning newspaper delivers digitally and religiously each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's always $5 down, $10 a month. And our friends at the Maryland Jockey Club and Laurel, where they're racing, and the entries are on the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper. Any breaking news, you get it first on the WNST text service. That's all supported by our friends at Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. And Dennis Kolatzos will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home, maybe talking some Terps, probably talking some wrestling with Luke, no doubt, as we've lost Pedro Morales. I'm sure that'll be a huge topic matter for Dennis and I this Thursday. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.